Is there a way to make people like you? The New York Telephone Company studied telephone conversations and looked into which words people used most frequently. The word was the personal pronoun I. It was used 4,000 times out of 500 conversations. When you look at a group picture taken, who will you find first in the picture? If you think people are interested in you, suppose the following. Let's say you died tonight. How many people will come to the funeral? Should people be interested in you if you don't show interest in people first? Chapter 1: How to be a welcome person anywhere. Through personal experience, I have realized that if you truly pay attention to others, no matter how popular and busy you are, you can gain that person's attention and time coordination. If you want to make friends, take the trouble of doing something for others, and show people with an active and passionate attitude. Let me give you an example of how this view of life works. Charles Walters, an employee of a large bank in New York City, was in charge of producing a secret report on a company. Mr. Walters went to meet him because there was only one person who knew about the information he desperately needed. He was the president of a large company. On the way to the president's office, the secretary stuck his head out the door and told the president that there was no stamp he could give today. "I'm collecting stamps for my 12-year-old son," the boss explained to Mr. Walters. Mr. Walters began to talk about his work and ask questions. The president took a vague attitude. Interview time was short, and Mr. Walters got nothing. Mr. Walters told this story during class. "Honestly, I didn't know what to do. And then I remember what his secretary said, my 12-year-old son, stamps. It reminded me of our bank's foreign affairs department collecting stamps. Stamps taken from all the continents of the world. The next morning I called him and told him there were stamps for him. It was a warm welcome. His face was shining with a smile and good wishes. We spent half an hour talking about stamps and looking at pictures of the child. And he gave me all the information I wanted. Even though I didn't ask for it, he told me everything he knew. There are countless examples of this. The first rule to make people like you is to truly care about others. Chapter 2: Simple Ways to Make a Good Impression. I asked thousands of businessmen to smile at someone every hour of the day for a week, and come to class and tell me the results. Let's see how it worked. There is a letter from Mr. William, who works on the American Stock Exchange. "I've been married for 18 years. Throughout my marriage, I didn't laugh at my wife until I woke up in the morning and went to work. And I didn't say more than 20 words. I was one of the bluntest people in the world. My teacher gave me this assignment, so I decided to smile for a week. The next morning, I looked in the mirror at my serious face and brushed my hair, and said, 'Bill, erase that grumpy face right now. You're going to smile from now on.' Then he sat down at the breakfast table and smiled, saying good morning to his wife. You warned her in advance that she might be surprised. Her reaction was more than that. She looked embarrassed and shocked. On the way to work, I also greet the security office of my apartment with a smile. I also smile at the cashier when I get my change from the subway booth. I also smile at people on the stock exchange who haven't seen me smile until recently. A few days later, I found out that everyone received my smile and returned it to me. I have complaints and amused by those who visit. Listening to them with a smile on my face makes things a lot easier. I share an office space with another real estate agent. I have just shared with her a new philosophy about relationships. Then she came clean. When I first came to the office, she said she thought I was a terrible complainer. Only recently has she changed her mind. She says I look human when I smile. Remember, the person who wrote this letter is a stock trader with a high level of intelligence and a bright world. He is a person who buys and sells stocks on the New York Stock Exchange for his own benefit. It is so difficult that only 1 in 100 people can succeed. If you don't want to laugh, what should you do? When you do, force yourself to laugh and pretend you are already happy. Then you can be happy. Professor William James of Harvard University wrote, "Acts seem to follow emotions, but in fact, actions and emotions go hand in hand. Therefore, if you control behavior that you can control with your own will, you will be able to indirectly control emotions that cannot be directly controlled. If you have lost enjoyment, the best way to voluntary enjoyment is to have a pleasant attitude and act, and speak like someone who is already joyful. You can smile at the person to make people like you." Chapter 3. Remember the other person's name. The reason why many people can't remember other people's names is simple. This is because they don't want to spend time and energy focusing on other people's names. Explain that there are many busy things to do, but even someone as busy as Franklin Roosevelt saved time memorizing and remembering the name of the mechanic he met. Chrysler built a special vehicle for President Roosevelt, who had a crippled leg. Chamberlain and a mechanic took the car to the White House. Let's look at Mr. Chamberlain's letter, which tells us his experience at that time. "I let President Roosevelt know the special equipment needed to handle cars. In return, he taught me a lot of ways to handle people." The president looked overjoyed to visit the White House. He was friendly, chanting my name. The impressive part was that I showed him an interest in the things I show him and say. When I found out that my friends and colleagues were looking at the car with admiration, the president told me in front of them, "Thank you very much for the time and effort you put into developing this kind of car, Mr. Chamberlain. You did a wonderful job." I was interested in the trivial turns that I had worked hard to devise and praised the many equipment, one by one, to the First Lady and even to the worker. When I finished my driving lesson, the president said to me, "Mr. Chamberlain, I made the Federal Reserve wait half an hour. Now I have to go to work." I took a mechanic to the White House. The mechanic never said a word to the president, who only heard his name once. But the president was looking for a mechanic before he left. He shook hands, called me by my name, and thanked me for coming all the way to Washington. Not long after returning to New York City, I received a photograph of the president's signature. In the accompanying note, the president again thanked me for my help. It remains a mystery as to how such a man even had the time to write a note like this. Franklin Roosevelt knew that one of the simplest and most self-evident ways to get a favor was to remember the name. Chapter 4. Easy way to conversate. Recently, I met a renowned botanist at a dinner party hosted by Greenberg, the publisher of New York. I had never spoken to a botanist before. He was such an interesting person. Every time he told me amazing facts about hemp, indoor gardens, and humble potatoes. I was completely fascinated and had no choice but to listen. When it became midnight, I said goodbye to my companion and left the party. The botanist went to the host and offered various compliments about me. He finished evaluating me by saying that I was the funniest interlocutor. Am I a funny interlocutor? I barely said a word. Unless I changed the subject of the conversation, I wouldn't have said a word even if I wanted to, because I'm someone who knows absolutely nothing about botany. Just like I have no idea what a penguin's interior looks like. But I listened intently. I was genuinely interested, so I listened to him hard, and the botanist felt it. Of course he liked it. This kind of listening is the best compliment we can see in the other three. What is the secret to a successful business interview? According to Charles Eliot, the former president of Harvard University, there is no secret to a successful business relationship. It is most important to focus only on the person you are talking to. Nothing else can make the person feel as important as you. So if you want to be a good conversationalist, you have to be a hard listener. Remember that the person you are talking to cares 100 times more about his needs and his problems than about you and yours. His tooth decay is much more important than the famine in China, which caused 1 million casualties. The abscess in his neck is more important than the 40 earthquakes in Africa. Just remember to make others talk about themselves. Chapter 5. How to get people's attention. Anyone who has visited Theodore Roosevelt at the presidential residence in Oyster Bay is astonished by his varied and extensive knowledge. Roosevelt had a lot to say, no matter what the topic was or who it was. How is this possible? Because whenever a visitor came, Roosevelt stayed up all night studying topics that might be particularly interested in the person who came to him the day before. Like all leaders, Roosevelt knew that the royal road to a person's heart was to talk about what he valued most. William Ryan Phelps, who taught literature at Yale University, learned this lesson early on. He said this in his thesis, Human Nature. When I was 8 years old, I spent a weekend at Aunt Libby Lindsley's on the Housatonic River. A middle-aged man came over one evening. After a friendly chat with my aunt, she showed me her interest in the Knicks. At the time, I was going crazy about boats. She talked to me about the subject in a really interesting way. After he left, I gushed about him. What an amazing person he is! What an interest in boats! I asked my aunt about him. He told me that he was a New York lawyer who had no knowledge of boats and had no interest in the subject. Then why did he just talk about the boat to me the whole time? Because he's a gentleman. He noticed that you were interested in boats. That's why I talked about things that you find interesting, that would please and think of you. You acted kindly. Since then, I have never forgotten my aunt's words. There are countless instances where getting help from others, or knowing the other person's interests in business was very helpful. If you want to be liked by others, talk to them according to their interests. Chapter 6: How to make people like you as soon as they see you. There is one law that is most important to human behavior. Always make others feel that they are important. John Dewey said that the desire to be important is the deepest impulse of human nature. William James says that the principle that lies at the very bottom of human nature is the desire to be recognized. The reason we are not animals is that the impulse led us to civilization. People want to be recognized by others they meet. They want to be recognized for their true value. Have you ever read Hull Caine's novels? Novels such as Christian, The Judge, and The Man of the Island. Millions of people read his novels. His father was a blacksmith, and due to circumstances, he only attended school for 8 years in his life. But at the time of his death, he was the richest novelist in the world. Hull Caine liked the genres of sonnets and ballads, so he devoured all of the poems written by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Caine even wrote a piece praising Rossetti. Rossetti was pleased. Perhaps he thought to himself, a young man who values my abilities this high is probably a very intelligent fellow. So Rossetti invited the blacksmith's son to London and made him his secretary. This was a huge turning point in Caine's life. This was because his new job allowed him to meet contemporary writers. Caine began his career as an author whose name would live forever, with the advice and encouragement of other writers. Caine's mansion on the Isle of Man, Gribbe Castle, has become a hotspot for tourists all over the world. He left a legacy of $2.05 million. But who knew? Caine could have ended his life as a poor, unknown writer, if he hadn't written something in admiration of a famous author. This is the enormous power of heartfelt compassion. Rossetti also thought he was important. It's not a surprise. Almost everyone thinks that he is very important. Disraeli, who was the cleverest man to rule the British Empire, said, "Tell someone else about himself, and he will listen for hours and hours." There are 6 ways to make the other person like you in human relationships. First, pay sincere attention to others. Second, smile at the other person. Third, remember the other person's name. Fourth, be a good listener. Fifth, speak according to other people's interests. Sixth, make the other person feel that they are important. Now, let's cover the book and apply the philosophy of compassion that we learned today to others. Let's look forward to seeing how it will work in your relationships. I'm rooting for your passion.